Good evening, or sorry, good afternoon, everybody. Tara Washington here from Decide DeKalb Development Authority. It is a pleasure to bring you some really great information from our experts in all things housing this afternoon. You are going to hear directly from Tiffany Wills, who is a Vice President of Redevelopment and Strategic Initiatives here at Decide DeKalb Development Authority, and the amazing Dr. Alan Ferguson, who is our Chief Housing Officer for DeKalb County Government. The conversation this afternoon is around DeKalb Housing Catalyst Program and what multifamily gap financing and the loan fund looks like. I am not going to keep you from all this really great information. I will go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Alan Ferguson and Tiffany Wells.
All right, great. Thank you, Tara, and thanks everyone for joining us, this afternoon. So we are here this afternoon to discuss what we believe is going to be an exciting opportunity to really advance housing here in DeKalb County, and that's our DeKalb Housing Catalyst Program, which is a multifamily gap financing loan fund that we're anticipating launching with the approval of the funding and the financing for our housing investment bond initiative. So this will be one of the programs that comes out of that initiative. And so first and foremost, I'd like to thank, and appreciate the leadership of Madam CEO Lorraine Cochran Johnson, as well as our Board of Commissioners, who have been adamant and vigilant in their support of housing related matters, and actually getting us, to this point where we can start talking about, what we intend to do, the resources we intend to bring to open up housing opportunity here in DeKalb County. So next slide, please. So today's session, as I mentioned, is for the DeKalb Housing Catalyst Program, but we've already had two previous sessions earlier last week on the DeKalb Home Start Program, is our new down payment assistance program we're looking at launching, as well as DeKalb Brighter Home, which is an owner-occupied rehab program we're also anticipating launching later this year. And so those recordings are available. They're on the Decide DeKalb YouTube channel. You're free, to go there and check them out. You can also get to them by going to the Decide DeKalb website. There'll be links there available on their page. And this information session today will also be recorded and also posted for folks to view later. Next slide, please. So, before I continue, I do want to give a reminder to everyone that we are still in the process of developing the comprehensive housing plan for DeKalb County. So the comprehensive housing plan was an effort, really approved, I believe, in late 2024, maybe early 2025 by our Board of Commissioners to really, provide a guide and overall driving strategy around housing and addressing housing opportunities as well as challenges here in DeKalb County. So that process is still underway. We just recently completed a series of community conversations where we heard from residents and various stakeholders. And we're still in the process of gathering that information and input. We just kind of passed the midpoint, if you will, in the process. But we're still looking for, feedback from residents and stakeholders, especially as we, digest the information and data that's been gathered, do some additional analysis. That voice of our residents and stakeholders is incredibly important as we craft strategies moving forward. So the intent is sometime in the late summer, around August, September timeframe, we'll be returning back to the community to socialize the recommendations that have come out of all of the analysis, the data, and the feedback and the input. And once we do a second round, if you will, of community engagement sessions on those recommendations, we'll finalize those and put them in a nice package and present them to the board of commissioners sometime October, November time frame for official adoption. So your voice in this is incredibly important. So I just want to put a reminder out there to participate. If you go to the next slide, to keep up with the work of the comprehensive housing plan, which is being led by our planning and sustainability department. That's Ava Chavot, who is our lead planner on that effort for us in DeKalb County. We also have two great consulting teams and enterprise community partners in Sycamore Consulting, who are the ones charged with executing, if you will, and facilitating the plan. And then myself, yours truly, I'm involved as well as a technical advisor. But for more information on that process, on that plan, and to add your input, please go to engagedecalb.decalbcountyga.gov slash DCCHP, or you can use the QR code on your screen to link to that webpage and learn more about the comprehensive housing plan and how you can add your voice and input and be engaged in that exercise. So thank you. Next slide. So really our purpose here today is to, discuss, how we advance housing through strategic financing. And that's through, providing a tool, a resource that we're going to discuss this afternoon, which is the gap financing tool. But overall, our vision for housing and opening housing opportunity here in DeKalb County really centers around, creating more access, more housing choice and, stronger communities. So those are our overall themes that we're pursuing from a housing perspective, for 2026. We think those themes are going to carry through into the comprehensive, housing plan. And it's really kind of sets the table for where we want to drive housing in DeKalb County, not just now, but for years to come. Next slide. So to give some context around housing in DeKalb County, and this for those who are in the field, is not going to come by, any surprise. We, certainly have our opportunities, but we have our housing challenges that really everyone across the board, whether you're doing market rate development, workforce, affordable housing, or you're trying to serve some of our most vulnerable populations in the homeless and the underhoused. Rising development and construction costs, increasing, financing gaps in both affordable and workforce housing, and the limited availability of attainable units here in the county. And then, of course, the changing market dynamics, that impact project feasibility, such as, rapid rises or sudden or unsuspected or anticipated rises in interest rates, as well as, the potential or the lack of potential of, consistent funding and support from some of our federal agencies, like HUD, for example, and their changing landscape, really creates a field of uncertainty. But we feel that there's a very strong role for local government, in this case, the DeKalb County government, to play a role in enabling and supporting housing production and preservation, here in the county. And that's what's, brought us to this moment. Next slide. So, why, gap financing? So when we talk about gap financing and how it fits within the capital stack, we're really talking about that smaller, percentage of capital, if you will, that, if, investors, developers, as projects receive just that additional amount of funding, with flexible terms and at a lower cost restraint, they really can unlock the potential of an entire deal. And so in my, past history and experience, providing funding sources for anywhere from as low as a million, to 2 million or $3 million, in some cases was able to unlock, 10, 15, 20 times that amount in terms of overall equity and debt and private capital in order to allow a project to happen. Because it's all about, the numbers, it's all about the math and whether or not you can get to financial feasibility. And gap financing does that. And so common barriers we see in the multifamily space, are, equity shortfalls, as terms and conditions and markets, change. Debt constraints. I think everyone recognizes that when interest rates go up, um, you know, the, lending community becomes a little bit more conservative, and that limits the opportunity to get third-party debt on a lot of projects. And so, debt constraints can lead to gaps in financing, as well as increasing soft costs and increasing hard costs. The effects of inflation, supply shortages, all of the things kind of go hand in hand in creating these financing gaps. And so what we really try to focus on is, how public financing tools can unlock really stalled or, financially infeasible projects to make them financially feasible and viable, and allow them to move forward. And so if you think about how many projects that are currently sitting on the sideline because they're trying to solve the math on the capital stack, but all other things indicate it will be, a strong, stable, and viable and successful project. That's what gap financing is for. So next slide. So that is why we are here, and we are trying to introduce the DeKalb Housing, Catalyst program. So, the core objectives, with this program, obviously, we want to increase affordable housing supply. DeKalb County, we are very strong proponents of, mixed income communities. That's notwithstanding for special targeted populations. We won't, look and examine at 100% affordable on a case by case, basis. But typically, when you're going to see us supporting even 100% affordable, we're going to look, for supporting mixed income affordable communities, especially as it conforms to the LIHTC program. And then we also want to make sure that we position the county as well as position properties in the county to pursue and leverage private investment. And the targeted outcomes for this exercise is really to accelerate, project delivery, i.e., get projects that are kind of sitting on the sideline and sitting on the shelf and get those projects moving so they can get delivered and, help us try to alleviate some of the pain that we're experiencing in this housing crisis, and driving, deeper levels of affordability and I would say longer term affordability as well. We look at this tool as not just providing, financing, but really making, investments in affordable housing on behalf of the county. And so you're going to see us really emphasize, affordability, not just in depth, but in length of term in this program. And with that having been said, I will turn it over to my colleague, Tiffany Wills, who will talk to you about project eligibility and some of the other parameters around the program. So, Tiffany?
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. And I am Vice President of Redevelopment and Strategic Initiatives here at Decide DeKalb Development Authority. Before we start going through eligibility criteria and process, just want to remind everyone that we do have a Q&A feature activated in this Zoom. If you don't see it on your bottom menu of your screen, if you click on More, which is three dots in a circle, you should see the Q&A with a comment box and question mark. And you can submit your questions in writing and we'll respond to those in writing back while we're on this call or verbally when we get to the end for some open Q&A. So which eligible projects are going to be included in our Catalyst program? So minimum number of units per project will be 20, and we'll have a minimum affordability requirement of 10 affordable units. Eligible projects are also going to include new construction, substantial rehabilitation, Acquisition rehab will also be an eligible use. So focusing on not only existing housing stock, but also preserving and improving existing housing stock and new construction. Anywhere in DeKalb County is going to be eligible for the program, including properties located within incorporated municipal boundaries. So City of Brookhaven, City of Atlanta, and a number of our other 13 cities will be eligible as part of the program. Next slide, please. Our affordability thresholds and framework. We will have a priority for applications that include units that are up to 60% AMI. Our second priority tier is going to be that over 60% up to and including 80% AMI in workforce housing. We, of course, are going to be encouraging mixed income developments. So having a variety of income levels for residents is really a priority and target for the program. Additionally, all projects will need to align with both local, regional, and federal affordability standards. So if you have a LIHTC project, you'll need to comply with LIHTC requirements through DCA. If you have a HUD-funded project, you will still need to meet those requirements. And if you have a combination of all of those sources of funding in your capital stack, you will still need to comply with all regulations. Next slide. So the $1 million question, or in this case, $2.5 million question, how much is each project going to be eligible for? So we have a per unit calculation. So for units that are up to 60% AMI, they will be eligible for $100,000 per unit. For units ranging from 60% to 80% AMI, you'll be eligible for $75,000 per unit. Per project, there will be a maximum of $2.5 million for loan funds. Our interest rates are going to be competitive and based on financial feasibility of each application, but a not to exceed amount of 4.5%. And our transactions are also going to require a right of first refusal for either DeKalb County, the Housing Authority, or Decide DeKalb, depending on the entities that are involved with the transaction, will have a right to purchase if the applicant and owners sell the property before the end of the affordability compliance period. Next slide. So we will also have a lot of flexibility in our Catalyst program. Loan terms will be up to 45 years, amortization periods up to 45 years. We will have an option for interest-only periods during construction. We'll also consider balloon payments at the end of a loan term. And then additionally, we are going to be making sure that our funding is going to be flexible based off of the priority lenders in the transaction and working with senior debt requirements and also equity partners. Next slide, please. So we also have pretty competitive underwriting criteria. Our minimum debt service coverage ratio for all repayable debt is going to be 1.1. Our maximum debt service coverage ratio is going to be up to 1.3. And then we'll also have an LTV of 95% and a LTC of 90% total. We have made sure that we have crafted these guidelines to comply with other sources of funding, other HUD loan programs, and tax credits based off of the current QAP. So we really want to ensure that these projects that receive the housing bond funds and investment are going to be able to sustain long term while also mitigating risk for the loan fund. Next slide. Our eligible uses of funds are going to include all development-related costs. So, of course, it's going to serve as gap financing. So you will have to have secured your other costs of capital. And if it's a pending LIHTC application, then we likely will do a contingent award so that our loan fund awards are contingent upon approval and receipt of a LIHTC investment in that project. But other eligible uses of funds will be, of course, hard costs, soft costs, design, pre-development, and in transactions that will include an acquisition that may also be an eligible use of funds. Next slide, please. So, our value proposition through the Catalyst program is that we are going to be assisting with reducing these financing gaps in projects that otherwise would be financially feasible, but for our funding. This is going to be long-term, low-cost capital to ultimately help these projects maintain financial feasibility or become financially feasible. We are going to be ensuring that our funding is going to be efficient and allow our programs and these projects to ensure that the capital stacks are enhanced by our participation in the transaction and not creating an additional burden. Additionally, the program is geared, of course, at those lower levels of affordability with the priority for the 60% AMI and under units, with the second priority for 61 to 80% AMI. This program really is meant to be a public-private partnership tool to allow more development to occur. So by offering the program countywide, including those municipal incorporated areas, this is really meant to increase housing production across DeKalb County. So collaborating with municipal jurisdictions on projects that are located within their boundaries and allowing those to have access to capital really is meant to be a comprehensive strategy in order to evenly distribute the funding across the county. Additionally, we will be aligning with local housing and land use plans of local municipalities. Additionally, this economic development tool will also assist with stabilizing the tax base here in DeKalb County. And of course, and certainly not least, improving housing affordability and housing options for residents that are currently in DeKalb and those looking to relocate. Next slide, please. So how will we apply for funding and award? So Decide DeKalb will be issuing a notice of funding availability. The housing bond issuance right now is targeting a closing in July. So we anticipate once the bonds close and we have final guidelines and applications that we will issue a notice of funding availability likely in August or September. Our application requirements will also be posted along with the notice of funding availability, and developers and applicants will submit their applications. They will be first come, first serve. So the complete applications will be reviewed as we receive them and dated and time stamped to ensure that we are reviewing those projects that are submitted and that are ready to proceed with closing and financing. We'll complete that underwriting and financial review of each application, and then the Decide DeKalb board will approve all awards for the Catalyst program. There will not be any additional approvals with either the Housing Authority or DeKalb County, who are partners in the Housing Bond Fund. For the Catalyst program, the Decide DeKalb board will be the approval and provide commitments. Additionally, we will be coordinating with the developer and applicants that receive awards across other potential county programs and Decide DeKalb funding programs and incentives. Next slide. And I will hand it back over to Alan.
All right, thanks, Tiffany. So, for this, particular program, we're really trying to be, deliberate and move with strategic intent around, the type of impact we're trying to create here in DeKalb County. So, by bringing, the Housing Catalyst program forth, we're trying to accelerate, our pipeline of projects and potential housing projects that are here in DeKalb County. We want to contribute to our long-term housing production goals. So here in DeKalb County, we've kind of, put a line in the sand at over the next 8 to 10 years. We're looking to create or preserve 15,000 units. And this program is a part of that puzzle around creating and preserving those units. And so it's really, really important and critical that we launch and we move forward. Also, we want to really encourage, as Tiffany mentioned, continued public-private, partnership. As I mentioned earlier, providing, a small capital injection can lead to, multiples of impact in terms of attracting and motivating private investment as well as leveraging other public provided resources. And so we want to make sure that we continue that type of engagement in the county. And then, integration with our broader housing investment bond strategy. So this is just one program, that we're launching. I mentioned some others, and there will be more as we move forward. And it's all a part of creating an integrated platform of resources to address housing production, housing preservation, as well as housing our most vulnerable residents in terms of the homeless and unhoused, and building capacity for the affordable housing ecosystem here in DeKalb County. So we're really excited about the program that we're advancing under the Housing Investment Bond and the impact that it'll have here in DeKalb County. Next slide, please. So the implementation timeline, as you have already heard, we're anticipating, a closing of our first round of housing investments bonds sometime in the July timeframe, but we are already going to get to work in regards to kind of building out the infrastructure and the systems to make this program as well as other programs happen. Once we do that and we do prepare for launch, we're going to have an initial, application cycle where we'll do an intake of applications, for this program as well as, for others. And then we'll, set about a cadence and set, expected timing around, future, funding rounds. Again, taking into context, the, LIHTC cycle, as well, to making sure that, our funding applications are in alignment with application funding cycles for low-income housing tax credits. But I also should mention that this particular program is not exclusively for low-income housing tax credit deals. If you have a non-LIHTC, workforce housing, affordable housing type of execution, your project would also be eligible for this funding. And then there's going to be, ongoing stakeholder engagement, as, you launch these programs and the landscape changes, there are changes in, the macro economy, local economy, and other market dynamics. We'll continue to stay engaged with stakeholders to make appropriate tweaks and modifications to the program as it moves along, really kind of adjusting with the times, available resources and current market conditions to make sure we're still, operating or running a strong and viable program. Next slide, please. So, partnership opportunities. Obviously, there's, an intent here to partner with, developers, as well as other capital providers in the marketplace. We are really going to lean in and emphasize strong coordination with our municipalities here in DeKalb County, encouraging them to bring whatever local municipal tools and resources that they have to bear in order to facilitate housing development and projects, within their footprints. Alignment with nonprofit and other institutional partners, where, we can combine and leverage and extend resources to create more and to do more where it matters, and try to make those happen sooner rather than later. And then as well as integration with other, county housing initiatives as well. So that means our community development department working alongside with Director Alan Mitchell and his team as they deploy home and CDBG dollars, making sure that, we can also complement those types of efforts as well, and vice versa in terms of advancing housing opportunity in the county. Next slide. So definitely we want to hear from you. So yeah, I have not been checking the chat, but if there are any questions out there, we'd be more than happy to entertain any questions, provide as good an answer, as complete an answer as we possibly can at this moment. But we're excited about it and we want to hear from you. So are there any questions in the chat?
Dr. Allen, I think that we've got Tiffany's working hard. She's answering a handful, but there is one question regarding the borrower's requirements. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. And by borrowers' requirements, maybe kind of expound a little bit about that. Typically what we're going to want to see are, qualified investors, qualified developers, applying, for, this particular program. And so by, qualified, we typically, won't entertain, a completely de novo organization, or enterprise that hasn't done housing development before. You've got to have at least some type of experience, under your belt, because you can imagine these resources, are not infinite, they're finite. And we want to make sure that we're going to deploy them with partners and on projects that have a very strong opportunity for success. And so if you're a de novo developer or organization, what I would recommend is that you partner with an existing established organization, of your, choice, to make your application and position your application so they'll be, most strong and most viable, in this process. But other than that, we're really looking, for developers, and in terms of borrow eligibility, obviously you need to have, site control. We want to see, developer, experience. We want to know and understand kind of where you are in, the, entitlement process. I would say if your, project is kind of subject, to rezoning, we want to know where you are in that process. And so we can really try to ascertain the potential of you being successful in your rezoning efforts. All of those things, and there's a myriad number of things that you kind of take into context when you're looking at projects and trying to determine borrower eligibility. And so probably what we'll do once this is over and the Q&A kind of frequently asked questions page, we'll just outline kind of a list of eligible criteria when it comes to specific, borrower conditions, that we're looking for.
I think that you answered that question, but Justin, hopefully that gives you exactly what you need. And to Dr. Ferguson's point, we might be able to expound on that after the chat. So Tiffany and Dr. Allen, there is another question regarding the timeline to receive a term sheet and get approval for closing. This is from Marissa Phipps, who says, when competing with market rate developers for acquisitions, it is a challenge. And so most sellers are not patient enough to wait through the application and board process for public funds. So I think her initial question was around timeline to receive a term sheet and to get approval for closing.
Sure, I can take that. So once Decide DeKalb has received a full and complete application, our underwriting takes about 3 to 5 business days, and then we'll issue a draft term sheet to negotiate with the applicant and developer. So depending on how long those negotiations take, if they take a week, then we would have time to make our next board meeting. So it could be anywhere from 30 to 60 days, just depending on when we receive the full application, when the term sheet has been negotiated. Then our board approves the term sheet as well as approval for Decide DeKalb staff to negotiate the final loan and closing documents and execute closing. So we will have an executed term sheet once we receive board approval. So I would recommend that in your application, you indicate there's a project summary section that will be included. Indicate that you are currently in negotiations for a purchase and sale agreement, or you already have a purchase and sale agreement that has a specific date, perhaps for your contingency period. So that we will ensure that we are moving as quickly as possible for your application, as we are sensitive to the fact that some of these purchase and sale negotiations can be extremely time consuming and competitive. And we'll do our best to review the full applications as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Tiffany. So there is the question regarding, are the loans anticipated to all be hard, or is there an opportunity for soft pay?
So I'm assuming by hard pay you mean must pay debt, and soft pay you're meaning that your payments would be based upon available cash flow. And what I would probably say is that potentially is a possibility. However, you would probably have some different terms, and it would look less like kind of traditional subordinated debt and maybe look more like, a mezzanine type structure where we're looking for some, type of additional benefit in this process, which, could potentially be, a percentage of ownership. So I think we're going to, be flexible on that. And again, we can outline some of those potential parameters once we, kind of finalize terms. So folks will have clarity around what you know cash flow based payments would entail.
Excellent. All right, Tiffany, I think this is for you. You may have addressed this earlier, but are the deals that have already closed, construction started, eligible to apply?
Okay, so this is a project that was previously fully funded, and I'm assuming that due to either project delays or increase in costs, that the project is no longer financially feasible. Uh, Alan, I will defer to you on how we want to handle those. I know some projects or some funding programs like to get in before construction has commenced from a liability standpoint, but what are your thoughts?
You know, I would probably say if your project has already commenced and you've already gone to a financial, closing, however, you are facing funding gaps, I would say still submit that project. But again, we're going to talk about, potentially some different terms. And those terms could definitely include um, us providing a capital injection, but in exchange for that, some type of ownership position, versus being in the traditional debt stack, as well. Especially if you already have other layers of subordinate funding. Once you get down to, third, fourth, fifth lien position, I might as well be a part of the ownership anyway. And so, so under that context, we would probably be looking more for providing capital injections that also come with some ownership and equity positions as well.
Great, thank you.
Well, you guys are just dynamic. You've answered everybody's question. I know that there probably are some things that we can elaborate on the Q&A, but I think that that is all that we've got at this point. Tiffany and Dr. Allen, if you guys would like to close us out, but I think that we've provided everybody with what they need.
All right, great, great. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. And if you have additional questions, please feel free to submit your additional questions. You can send an email to housing@decidedecab.com and submit additional questions, feedback, so on and so forth. We really are excited and we want to hear from you. Please keep in mind, as I mentioned, the vision that we have and hold here in DeKalb County in regards to housing. We're trying to create more access, more housing choice, and stronger communities. And we also, firmly believe and understand, that we're not in this alone and we can't solve and address DeKalb County's housing challenges alone. So we're looking, for opportunities, to, partner and to collaborate and definitely, to talk about, new solutions, that we can provide to help facilitate housing opportunity in the county. Next slide, please. So I do want to mention we still have another session that's coming up actually this Thursday, where we're going to talk about our housing capacity building seed fund. And so this is going to be a new initiative where we're really trying to direct some resources on helping to develop more housing development capacity, within DeKalb County. So as a little bit of preview of that, we're anticipating talking on Thursday around a faith-based development cohort that we're looking to launch or maybe recast here in DeKalb County. So I think that'll be a very informative, exciting discussion, as well as a program that's targeted towards smaller developers and maybe more nascent developers around neighborhood scale development here in the county. So those are two things that we're anticipating launching under that housing capacity seed fund, and we're looking for opportunities to do more and creative and innovative things in that space to support building up the development and housing development ecosystem here in DeKalb County. And with that, I want to thank everyone again for participating. As I said several times, we're not in this alone, and we can't do it alone. We're grateful and thankful that we've got a very strong implementation partner in Decide DeKalb. Tiffany and her team, they have a tremendous amount of work ahead of them over the next several months. And we're glad and thankful we've got them on board to help us implement what we think are going to be some tremendously impactful programs here in DeKalb County. So again, if you have any additional questions or feedback, please email housing@decidedecalb.com. Send us your questions and your feedback. We'll, respond accordingly, and actually we'll post, some questions and as a part of a, kind of a frequently asked questions or Q&A on the website, so everyone can kind of share in those answers. And continue to follow us and stay engaged. Go to Decide DeKalb's website, sign up for the newsletter. Go to DeKalb County Government's website and sign up the newsletter so you can be informed and stay abreast of all the new developments we have in the housing space, as well as other activities in economic development, as well as general activities taking place in the county, so you can all stay in tune and engaged. So thanks, everyone, and we appreciate your time this afternoon, and have a great day.
Thank you.